Hi, I'm Alex.
And I'm Dani.
And we're seriously nerdy
about puppets.
So, fun fact, puppets are actually my day job, so I'm both personally and professionally seriously nerdy about puppets. But that's a good thing, because this build is getting donated to the Center for Puppetry Arts in Atlanta, Georgia, as part of their String Fling annual fundraising event. We'll tell you lots more about the Center for Puppetry Arts later, but for now, we're going to turn a bunch of objects that we had hiding around our craft room into a diorama by hand. Now, when I say by hand, it means that we're going to challenge ourselves to not use all of the cool tools and gadgets that we've acquired over the years, and instead rely on really simple methods and supplies to bring something to life from scratch. Now, you know we are seriously nerdy about coffee stirrers, and they are going to make up the majority of this diorama. We had an old Model T Ford kit that was sitting around collecting dust, so we're going to kit bash that for props and other architectural elements around the build. And as we often do, we're going to take miniature figures and recontextualize them into a scene that tells a story. Now, when we start on a project like this, we have a very loose idea of what it could be. We know we have these figures that both represent puppeteers. We want it to look like it's some sort of a puppetry workshop, and we think that it might be set sometime in the 15th or 16th century, ? Believe it or not, that's about as far as we got with the story before we just dove in and started building. A lot of times for builds like this, we just see where the materials and supplies take us, and we let the story evolve along the way. This can actually be really helpful if you're facing creative paralysis and not sure where to start, or you're waiting for things to be perfect. Ask yourselves what the challenges and the parameters are. For example, we knew we had this container pre-purchased from Michael's, but it was very tall relative to the figures that we were using. So we decided to make the base of our diorama a multi-level in order to elevate the figures. So in order to get started, we needed to build the floor and this upper level. How would our characters reach the upper level? Well, they would need a little staircase, so we built a staircase. Did we want it to be viewed from all four sides, or do we want it to feel like it's got a backdrop? We thought that maybe focusing the viewer in with a back wall would be helpful, so we built a back wall that allowed a place for us to display props. And when you work through these creative constraints like this, things like only having one puppeteer miniature figure becomes a creative challenge to solve. We can use figures that we already have and substitute one of their hands with an object that makes it look like she's holding a puppet. Even challenges like trying to use as many pieces from the Model Ford kit as possible meant that we were looking at objects in new ways and making decisions that we might not have made otherwise. So, if you feel like you're in a creative rut, we highly encourage you to take this challenge, use objects that you already have, try to tell an original story in a small format, and try to do it by hand, because the ideas that you're going to generate with these constraints are going to be so much different than if you'd sat and tried to plot it all out before you get started. Okay, that's what I have to say. Now I'm going to be quiet so you can watch this beautiful dry brushing. I just love dry brushing so much. It's so simple and so effective. So we knew we had this little workshop platform, some sort of a workbench, and then we turned our attention to props for the scene. We used some military tarps and bedrolls to create bolts of fabric that they would use to create puppets, some scraps of styrofoam that could be books for a bookshelf. We even used one of the seats from the Model T Ford and created a very loose wood framework for it so that it looks like a little sofa. All of the objects so far had started to land the scene maybe somewhere in Western Europe, so we committed to that and started making choices accordingly. What would a wall texture look like in Western Europe in the 15th or 16th century? Maybe a stucco or a gesso or a plaster. So we created that texture using a combination of Mod Podge, paint, and plaster of Paris. We also made sure to mask it off so we had really satisfying masking reveals. Now, we could have done the back of the diorama and created an outdoor scene in that space as well, but I think there's something really nice about only telling one story at a time. So the back of the diorama is this flat black 3.0, and the front of the diorama is the more interesting aesthetic with this patinaed overhang, a bookshelf, and these rugged windows. Now, I don't know how common in this very vague time period it would have been to have two stacked windows like this, but I did like that the lower window would allow the viewer to see into the storage nook underneath the platform. You know how every once in a while you're a little bit glad that you're a hoarder? This is one of those times because it turns out we had tiny tools that we could use on our workbench to really help set the stage. In addition to those tiny tools, I created some quick blueprints that are inspired by the tent that we have the puppeteer using. At this point, all of the objects that we've been creating start to help the story feel more clear, and it feels like we have a plan. When we started, no plan, just a bunch of stuff and a vague idea. But as you work and assemble and discover things along the way, the story gets clearer. This is a team of artisans who build puppets and perform them. They like bright colors. They're a little disorganized. They have a pug that either hates them or loves them. And all of this is taking place in a fantasy world loosely inspired by Western Europe in the 15th or 16th century. See? That pile of objects went from a bunch of stuff into a little storyline. For our human figures in the scene, we had this sorceress whose hand was removed and replaced with this miniature angel figure, also made by Reaper Miniatures, to make it look like she was manipulating a puppet above her head. For the clothing on both figures, we took color inspiration from the rolls of fabric that are stored beneath the platform in the workshop so that it felt like they were all working from the same supply of fabric. And for the puppets for both of the figures, we intentionally kept the features more simple so that they did read as puppets and not as tiny humans. Well, tiny humans and one dragon. We were absolutely enchanted by this sculpt from Reaper Miniatures that has this puppeteer attempting to manipulate a puppetry tent while his dog is affectionately attacking him, is what we're gonna say. It felt like such an easy jumping off point for a piece that we knew we were going to donate to a puppetry cause to have a figure that is such a beautiful and hilarious celebration of puppetry. So hats off to you, Reaper Miniatures. Now, speaking of puppetry, it seems like an appropriate time to tell you more about my friends at the Center for Puppetry Arts. This video is not sponsored, but we are enthusiastic fans of education and community and imagination, and that's exactly what they do there at the center every day. Since 1978, Kermit the Frog and Jim Henson literally helped cut the ribbon in 1978. They have been a celebration of the art of puppetry. They have exhibits, they have workshops, they bring in school kids to learn more about this ancient art form, and it is such an incredible thing to see. So if you are ever in Atlanta, Georgia, I highly recommend that you go visit them in person and see some really amazing things. And if you can't get there in person and you are a puppetry nerd like we are, the String Fling annual event has an online auction where this tiny diorama, as well as much cooler, very covetable objects, are available for auction, and all of it goes to support the Center for Puppetry Arts. Please go check them out, support the art of puppetry, and we will see you next time.